Well, everyone, it's date night with Mr. and the Mrs. B. How we
Date
doing
night.
today? It's date night.
Woo! The week went by fast.
Yeah. It was a busy week all the way around. So so hopefully all the men and the fathers had a great Father's Day
Yes.
weekend. We did some. We went out last Saturday, not just not just for Father's Day. It ended up being like celebrating Father's Day, but it was a friend of ours'
Celebrated
birthday,
birthday.
and so we took a boat out on the water and found a place and swim around. But I'm going to get back to that a little bit later on. So tonight we're talking about unintentional selfishness, and what does that
Mm.
what does that mean? First of all, nobody wakes up at the start of a day and says, you know what, today I'm going to be selfish, right? Can we agree on that?
Well, you would hope that no one wakes up.
Right? For the most part, we can say the majority of people don't wake up on a morning and say, hey, you know what, today I'm going to be selfish, right? That being said, sometimes we have these moments of unintentional selfishness. And what we really want to get people to understand once you've identified what unintentional selfishness is to have a conversation about it. Okay? So there's several instances and in many different relationship types that we experience or we get into a role of unintentional selfishness. For instance, you've had a rough day at work, okay? You come home, you don't want to talk about it, you want to just go, separate yourself. Now, I actually spoke about a situation like that in the book when I talked about this guy. He had a rough day at work. All he wants to do is come home and kick his feet up, open up a beer, and plant himself in front of the TV, while his wife was, cleaning all day, looking forward to him coming home, and he comes home and when she asks him how his day is, he's like dismissive. I don't want to talk about it. You know. Now, yes, not discounting the day that you've had, but there's a situation where you're not thinking about your partner who was home all day, looking forward to you coming home, maybe doing things and preparing herself for when you come home. And then because you had a rough day, you're in your moment. Now, again, not to discount your feelings, but it's also recognizing that when you're in a relationship, you have other people's feelings. And the same thing happens with parents too sometimes. Sometimes we unintentionally get wrapped up in our mode and we get into that situation of unintentional selfishness where we disconnect ourselves or we separate ourselves from what's going on, right? So how do you get around that is the question. How do you get past unintentional selfishness? So the first thing is to recognize that there's two people's feelings involved. That,
Yep.
like if something affects you and you're having a bad day,
It's gonna affect
it's
you.
going to affect me. And for the parents out there, if you're having a bad day, your kids will feel it. If you're in the workplace and it doesn't matter what type of relationship it is, what you're going through affects other people. Now, again, we're not trying to discount what you're going through and act as though it's not happening. What we really want for you is to have a conversation and be mindful that how you react affects other people. And at least some point when you get past that emotional situation, because nobody wants to talk to somebody that's emotional. Nobody wants to get into a conversation with someone who's in a deep, strong emotional situation. But just being mindful that the other people or other person has feelings too. And at some point, at least give them the opportunity to express how it made them feel when you went through what you went through. Does that kind of hit home? So going back to this past weekend, we We found a nice little island area, and with where we were boating and swimming around and stuff like that. Nice group of us, and next thing you know, you heard a lot of like cursing and yelling from the boat that was docked next door to us. And without really getting too much into it, you of course you hear cursing and yelling, you're gonna look in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But just to summarize everything, the guy on the boat, who obviously had a little bit too much to drink, was telling his fiance. We found out later on it was actually his fiance. So it was his fiance and another couple that came together on the boat, and he was literally shoving her. Now that's any guy seeing a man putting his hands on a woman, you know what's gonna go down, right? So literally shoving her and telling her get the hell off his boat. And he was ready to leave her and the other couple stranded on this island, right? And leave them there. And in his frenzy, just yelling at the top of his lungs, screaming, "Get off my boat, get off my boat." Now, once again, anyone can say, and anyone in that situation, any female would say, if a man was to do that to me, it'd be over. But for whatever reason, she stuck around. Okay, and that's a whole other episode we're going to talk about, which we've actually talked about, self-love
Yeah.
and all that stuff, right? So there's a lot of implications, but here on Date Night with Mr. and Mrs. B, we try our best, our hardest to refrain from judgment. Okay, situation is whatever their situation is. Some people like that kind of dysfunction in a relationship. It makes them feel wanted, loved for whatever reason. And when you're in a field like what we do, you come across many different dynamics of how a relationship works. But here's what's going to happen. When you have that unintentional selfishness, depending on the frequency, if it becomes a habit in many different areas, what happens is that just like a cancer, it eats away at your relationship. And because what happens is that we spoke about this before about everyone looks to feel validated, or
Looking for validation.
they
Yeah.
look for validation. We want to feel significance, right? So when you have those moments where you're wrapped up in your own emotions, but you don't have a conversation or acknowledge your partner's feelings or make them feel significant for what you're going through or how what you're doing affects them, they're going to internalize it. And what's going to happen is it's going to affect their self-esteem, it's going to affect their self-worth, it's going to, because all of a sudden they're going to start feeling like they don't matter. Now, of course, you didn't wake up at the start of a day with the intention of making your partner feel that way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even if you realize that, the awareness of it, you get to the point where you'll actually prevent yourself or catch yourself before you get to that point of that unintentional selfishness. You know, because it is selfish that you're only worried about your feelings in that moment and nobody else's feelings seems to matter, right? You got into a relationship, you have kids, they didn't ask to be brought into this world, but you have them. So their feelings matter as well. And there needs to be discussion about what their feelings are when you're in that mode.
Yeah. And also too, sometimes we're not even aware of it when we're doing it. And if your partner says something to you about it, they're probably right. They're probably right.
Yeah.
So, don't get defensive. And that's one of the hardest things is that when you're already in a mode,
Mm-hmm.
um, I guess most people be like, well, when would be a good time? Well, there really is no good time. I mean, it's a conversation that you have to have,
Yeah.
and sometimes honesty is, just it hurts, but
It's the best policy.
It is.
You
It
know.
is. However, like I said, you need to communicate, and let your partner or your spouse or whoever, you know, let them know what's going on. Maybe you guys can talk it through. Maybe you guys can come up with some action plans, like Mr. B talks about. What's your action plan, Um, you know, to try to get past that. What are you doing in the mornings? What affirmations are you telling yourself,
Yeah.
What is the situation? Who are you around?
I always bring it
Yeah.
back to, what's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing and
Mhm.
expecting a different result. So if you find yourself in a situation that keeps coming up with the same result over and over and over, but you're not doing anything different to address it, where does that lie on? The sole responsibility lies on you. And you're literally being insane just thinking something is going to change without making any sort of adjustments talking about it.
Mhm.
And sometimes the best person is external, because when you're wrapped up in your emotion, right, someone on the outside can maybe give you a better perspective and help clear up what you're going through. So you may say, okay, I don't want to burden this person with my problems. I get that, and that's normally a cop out, but it's a good excuse in the beginning. I don't want to burden my partner with my situation.
Or you're one of those that suppresses your feelings.
Oh,
And I say that because I'm guilty of it many times. So, and then the funny thing is, well, it's actually not funny, but, and I'm giving you this example is because we go through these things ourselves. And when I suppress my feelings, I actually, um, it affects me health wise.
mm-hmm.
It affects me health wise, which is not a good thing.
And not only that, when you suppress, anyone suppress. Think of a pressure cooker. Think of a volcano.
Yeah, that one thing that will set you off, and it might have not even had anything to do with the
Mm-hmm.
person or
Mm-hmm.
whatever situation is. It'll make the volcano
Yeah,
erupt.
one trigger word or one trigger situation,
Yeah.
you know, literally just explodes everything. But again, you didn't set out to have that level of dysfunction or that level of breakdown within the relationship. But be aware that the relationship can begin to erode. And literally, I've dealt so many times with couples that by the time they do seek coaching or anything like that, they've already given up on their relationship.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that because that's one of the things in our field that we come across so many times. And with with that being said, you have those conversations where that can be prevented. Where you literally get to a point where you're like, I don't know why. I don't care if it works anymore. You know? And that's just not a good place to be, where you just don't care anymore. And you feel love, you feel love for the person, and you actually hear some couples say that, I love you, but I'm just not in love with you.
And we've already done an
And we
episode of
did an
that.
episode on that, you know. But we you notice how we go around full circle. It's just taking you through the steps of how important the communication and what to talk about. See, in the book I talk about, communication is key, and you've heard it all the time. Communication is key. But what do you actually talk about? And that's what these episodes are about. To have a conversation on what you should be talking about. So, next time you have that unintentional selfishness, address it, and
Hmm.
then try to cut it down to the point that you stop being selfish.
Or just tell yourself, I need to get over myself.
There you
That's
go.
literally what I tell myself. Like, I'll catch myself in a funk,
Mm-hmm.
literally, and I'll say this sometimes to people while I'm on the phone with them, or, like coworkers, and I'll be like, you know what? I need to just get over myself.
Yep. And what Mrs. B said, that again, it happens in every aspect of your
Hmm.
relationships. So on that note, everyone, Mrs. B always tells you what,
Love up on each other.
and we'll talk to you next time on Date Night with Mr. and the Mrs. B.
Good night.
Have a good night, everybody.